I run marketing for Polygens. I've been here for about 9 months. I studied economics at UC Berkeley and also business at UCLA. So definitely on the business side, not really the STEM side. Yeah, it's been a great journey so far at Polygens, and looking forward to hearing what you guys have worked so hard for the last couple of months on. Let's see, why don't we go ahead and get started. Let's see, Ophelia is still missing, so we'll put her last if she joins. Students, if you have your presentations, if you could have them ready in a different tab. As I hand it off to you, I'll have you share the screen. We'll put you in spotlight, and everyone else will turn off their cameras and their audio while you present. That works for you guys. And all of your backgrounds look good. It looks mirrored for you, but the logos and everything look fine on my side. All right. Angela, are you ready?
Yes.
All right, the next 5 minutes are yours. Take it away. All right, screen share looks good.
Hey, good morning, all. I'll be discussing assistive technologies for neurodevelopmental disorders in the form of a review of literature. So what are these disorders? Neurodisorders are disorders that essentially affect the nerves and the brain found all over the system. In this paper, I'll be discussing specifically technologies offered in treatment of autism, ADHD, and Rett syndrome. And I use this research project to actually understand how technology bridges the distance between people with these disabilities and people without these disabilities. So the first thing we have here is autism. Autism spectrum disorder is a neurodevelopmental disorder that may lead to significant impairment in social communication and the imagination of an individual. So for the assistive tech I found over the course of over 40 publications I reviewed, actually, I found video-based instruction. And this video-based instruction, actually, it provides more motivating treatment in exploiting a child's tendency to imitate a model. And by a study done by Okugo in 20, and it shows that it was actually very effective for teaching many adaptive behaviors. And then we have augmentative alternative communication. This is actually very good for people with ASD since they have many speech problems. And following the study by Gangs and his colleagues in 2011, results show that there was increased social interaction and decreased challenges in behaviors of the autistic individuals. And for socially assisted robots, following the study by Krashen and her colleagues in 2017, these robots, in contrast to humans, can focus on one task at a time as opposed to like a human therapist, and it makes learning more targeted and simpler for the child. For Rett syndrome, this is a progressive developmental disorder found only in females, and these individuals are often left with residual communicative behaviors. The assistive tech I found here was the wearable sensor technology. Basically, this actually aims to affect emotional, behavioral, and autonomic dysregulation common in children with Rett's. And then for the augmentative communication, we have eye gaze tracking technology. So what this does is that it tracks the reflection of the cornea and the light in the eye to sort of tell where a person is looking. And it's good because most children with Rett's actually do not have speech functioning. And then we have virtual rehabilitation, and this actually aims to meet the number of repetitions suggested for optimal lasting neural changes, because what studies have found is that when a robot can actually repeat a certain activity more times, it causes a neural function in the body to actually learn new skill functioning. And then we have ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. This is a disorder that includes a combination of persistent problems such as difficulty paying attention, hyperactivity, and impulsive behavior. The assistive tech found here was actually a study by Amato and his colleagues in 2011 using especially assistive robots. And well, these robots that they provided a good acceptance intention of using a human and robot for therapeutic use in children with behavioral disorders. And then serious game. As we know, game technologies are very useful in grabbing the attention of many people from children to adults. So they actually apply this to children with ADHD. And the study by Bouquet in 2015 showed that these design approaches were actually useful in engaging populations with ADHD. And then for virtual reality, a study by Adams in 2019 used a virtual classroom to imitate the settings of a real life distraction in the classroom. And this standardized environment actually was used to carry out controlled research and use modified settings to provide accuracy in the research. So following these things I have actually discovered, I would actually look towards to more things such as pivotal response treatments, which is a behavioral treatment for autism. And I would also like to look into investigation of gene therapy for Rett syndrome. As we know, technology is ever evolving in our current society. So as we continue to actually illuminate some of the essential characteristics of autism, Rett's, and ADHD, both familiar and cutting edge technologies will play an increasing role in research and first further allow people with such disorders to live full and satisfying lives. Thank you.
All right, Angela, thank you so much for nicely summarizing your work over the last few months. For attendees and even panelists and participants, you can put your questions directly in the Q&A channel in the Zoom. And I'll start with one question here for you, Angela, which is, what was your original inspiration on the topic? How did you get interested in it?
So generally in the community where I grew up, most individuals with these kind of learning disabilities, they were often neglected and it didn't really sit well with me to see these kind of things. And when most people really don't understand the intricacies of this disorders. So I actually wanted to like deconstruct the negative notions surrounding them and use this as a way to broaden and enlighten people, I guess. And
got it. Okay. Yeah, very good. All right. Yeah, fascinating stuff. How technology can help us. All right. Aarav, are you ready to go?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right. Next 5 minutes are yours.
All right, thank you. Just give me a moment to screen share. Does it look good?
Yes.
All right, sounds good. Hello, everyone. My name is Aarav Sehgal, and I'm presenting my research that I worked on with my mentor, Jonathan Lee, titled How Low-Density Lipoproteins Promotes Aortic Valve Stenosis, Mechanism and Next Steps. Now, before we actually get into the topic, here are a few key vocabulary terms to know. I will be covering more terms when I get into my research, but these are the most important terms to know beforehand. First off, aortic valve stenosis is the narrowing of the valve in the large blood vessel branching off the heart. This narrowing keeps the valve from functioning normally. Now, this is the end result of my pathway that my research looked into. Next up is the endothelium, which is the tissue that lines the heart and the aortic valve. This is where the cellular functions that my research covers take place. So the entire pathway will essentially take place in the endothelial cells that line the heart tissue. Next are low-density lipoproteins, otherwise abbreviated to LDL, which are the protein group that transports cholesterol from the liver to areas such as the heart. This is known as the bad cholesterol when we talk about the dangers of fast food or other fatty foods. Just for your information, the good cholesterol is known as HDL or high-density lipoproteins, because they will actually take it to the liver and other places for it to be processed. Oops, sorry about that. This is, next up is everyone's favorite cell organelle, the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. So in other words, it essentially uses cellular respiration to generate energy for the cell in the form of ATP. Now, last but not least are the reactive oxygen species, which are essentially highly reactive byproducts from cellular functions. So overall, I conducted this research because there are many articles that link LDL to heart diseases, such as aortic valve stenosis. There are a few articles that actually formulate like a direct pathway between the two. My paper is a literature review, which means that, sorry, I don't know what this is. Okay. My paper is a literature review, which means that I synthesized information that I gathered from 35 papers on PubMed and the Web of Science, which are both medical journal databases, in order to formulate the pathophysiology of the disease at the cellular level. The research papers I used range from reports of experiments to the results of trials of new drugs. The results that these types of papers published and provided insight into how the aortic valve reacts to LDL and possible treatment options. Now, the results of my paper are the pathways that I formulated, which are covered in the next few slides. In the end, I wrote this paper with the hope that it may aid in the development of further research into the disease and open up more avenues for possible research moving forward. So the following diagram covers all my research in a simple, easy to follow manner. And it is at the very bottom of my actual physical research paper and just summarizes everything. But essentially the pathway of the disease starts with the accumulation of reactive oxygen species, which can form as a result of mitochondrial damage or dysfunctional antioxidants, which are responsible for removing ROS from the cell. Now, when LDL is exposed to ROS, it undergoes oxidative stress, which results in the degradation of LDL molecules. When LDL molecules are degraded or oxidized, two things may follow. The first is enhanced sphingomyelin production. The sphingomyelin is a part of the cell membrane and enhances the amount of ionic calcium interactions between the endothelial cells and its environment, which leads to calcification. And calcification is calcium buildup, which prevents the flow of oxygen-rich blood to the body. The second pathway is that the oxidized LDL can cause inflammation, which is the process by which damaged cells release chemicals that cause blood vessels to leak fluids into tissues, resulting in swelling. Now, inflammation, or a protein known as transforming growth factor beta, or TGF-beta, leads to fibrosis, which is the overgrowth, hardening, and scarring of tissues. Now, inflammation results in extracellular matrix buildup, which eventually leads to plaque formation. When plaque builds up in the aortic valve, it narrows, which again makes the valve stenotic. Now, my paper also goes beyond the pathway and covers possible therapeutic developments, such as proprotein convertase subtilism Caden type 9 inhibitors, or PCSK9 inhibitors, if you don't want to say that whole mouthful. Now, two types of these inhibitors are evoloclam and inclisiran. Now, PCSK9 inhibitors are a promising area of research due to their ability to prevent PCSK9 from elevating levels of LDL in the body. How they work are essentially diagrammed in that picture above. Finally, my paper also covers the debate over what the optimal treatment for the disease is. The debate is between balloon aortic valvuloplasty, otherwise abbreviated BAV, which is a procedure in which a balloon is actually inserted into the valve and inflated in order to open it up, and surgical aortic valvotomy, or SAV, which is the procedure by which leaflets of the valve are either replaced or reconstructed. Now, statistics show that both procedures have the same mortality rate of 11%. However, the reintervention rate for SAV is lower at 25% compared to BAV's 37% reintervention rate. Additionally, the follow-up duration for balloon aortic valvotomy was 6.5 years, whereas SAV's was 7.2 years. For these reasons, SAV is the better treatment procedure. Overall, my research proves that LDL is very involved in the development of aortic valve stenosis. I believe that the research I conducted can be used to find more areas or avenues of research into the disease, since there's so many entry points that they can use based on the pathophysiology, so that they can target many different areas and develop new therapeutic treatments for patients. The next steps include publishing my work in a high school research journal and formulating further questions or research topics that can be tested in a lab setting. Thank you for listening to my work, and the floor is now open to any questions people may have.
All right, thanks, Aarav. Leave it here for a few seconds. If anyone has any questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A or raise your hand to chat or just talk out loud. All right, one here. Are there any for patients who encounter this? Is it primarily external factors or internal factors that might cause a person's heart to have this condition?
There can definitely be certain genetic predispositions. That's why it's very common for doctors to have, or ask questions about family history, because heart disease is something that generally runs through a family. So there are times where someone is more susceptible to it based on what their family has, because their like internal works may just be more damaged or weaker and can't handle that level of cholesterol, and that may cause aortic valve stenosis. But mostly stuff like diet, activity levels, and all would initiate it, or sometimes even environmental factors, because I know in Asia, rheumatic fever is another very major cause for it, but that's not going to be found in more Western countries. So yeah, there are internal factors, but there's mostly external or environmental, I would say.
All right, great. Thank you for your presentation. We'll move to Muskan next, and I do see that Ophelia, you've joined. So Muskan, and then Charlie, then Christopher, then Caden, and then Ophelia, you'll go after Caden. All right, Muskan, the next 5 minutes are yours.
Yes, okay. Let me share my screen.
Okay.
Can everyone see this okay?
Yes, it's coming in good.
Okay, perfect. Hi, my name is Muskan Rekhani. I'm a junior who lives in a small town in Michigan with my mom, dad, and older sister. I'm passionate about art, tennis, violin, culture, and travel. For my project, I will be creating a children's book accompanied by a one-pager about growth mindset. In 6th grade, I learned about growth mindset from my principal and my teachers, and because of it, my approach to obstacles in life has changed. Because this has helped me so much, I really want to find a way to share what I learned with others in an effective way. To have a growth mindset means knowing and realizing our abilities and knowledge as humans are not fixed. We are not born with a finite set of skills. Instead, we all need to learn that everything can and has to be developed through hard, efficient work. Numerous studies by Carol Dweck has shown that the only way to get effective results is to be motivated to self-improve. For example, in one of her experiments, she found that students who elected to take an extra class to improve their work saw better improvement in their overall grades compared to students who mandated to take the same class. Also, research has shown that learning through stories for children is very effective. So to sum it all up, the best way to encourage people, especially children, is to make learning about growth mindset fun and engaging. A growth mindset would be weaved into the story by having a special plant grow every time the main character puts effort in an efficient way to achieve a goal. Similarly, the plant will also grow every time the character works to increase her cultural IQ. For example, Victoria, the main character, fills out her math study guide and reviews the problems that she struggles with, then she passes the test the next day. A growth mindset is important because mindset is all about self-improvement. This is what everyone must know and adapt to in order to be the best version of themselves. If a person were to continue her life with a fixed mindset, she would avoid obstacles and never reach all her life's goals. If that person obtained a growth mindset, however, she would love challenges because working through hard problems is how we learn to exercise our brain and grow our skills and intelligence. Children in specific can benefit from learning about and developing a growth mindset because it will advance them to do and be the best they can in life. Reading this book about growth mindset will encourage children to work hard and grow their intelligence and skills. Knowing and practicing a growth mindset may also lead to a more optimistic lookout in life, because if people have any challenges, they will know that with hard, efficient work, they can be overcome. Thank you.
All right. All right, Muskan, thank you so much for your presentation. Again, for everyone here, if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A. I wanted to start with a question here for you, which is, during your project, what was the most challenging part of completing your project?
Oh, the most challenging part was definitely, so our original plan was to make it a game, to make people, learn it better because they would exercise their brains. But it was very difficult to create a coding base and create the online game so it would be accessible for everyone. So then we switched to the story, which is working a lot better, but that was definitely a big obstacle.
Got it. And in what format is the story? Because
so it'll be an online PDF that teachers can print out.
Oh, fantastic.
So it'll be accessible for everyone.
Very good. I can't wait to get my hands on it. It'd be great for my daughter. All right. Any other questions from anybody on the panel or in the audience? All right, and if we have a few minutes at the end after everyone's presentations, we might circle back. So if you have questions that come to you later, just keep them and we can revisit at the very end. Thank you, Muskan.
Thank you.
Next, all right, next up, I'll introduce Charlie Algert. Charlie, if you're there, the next 5 minutes are yours.
All right. I did not understand that the elevator pitch was allowed to use slides, so I would have prepared some, but that's fine. So I will just kind of debrief everyone. My research compiles and reviews the current consensus on the neurocognitive processes that allow humans to communicate in multiple languages, and more importantly, keep them separate in the brain. So research primarily focused on simultaneous bilingual infants, which would be those who learned both of their languages simultaneously from birth, maybe in a household where one parent is speaking one language and one parent is speaking the other. And current accepted research in regards to this type of bilingualism provides strong evidence that the ability to discriminate between the two languages, that is, keep them separate in the brain, is developed in early infancy and is actually an innate human ability. But it is the degree, however, to which we're able to differentiate them that depends on a variety of phonological factors such as rhythm, attenuation, and exposure to each individual language. So research within the space it's very complex. It's a difficult thing to measure, and it has challenges in establishing agreed upon metrics for things like complexity of individual languages, and measuring overall vocabulary size, and also developmental differences. That's a major point of conversation, whether or not there's a developmental cost that comes with simultaneously learning two languages from birth versus being monolingual. And it was previously believed for a very long time that bilinguals experience a slower rate of linguistic development in comparison to those monolingual counterparts. But through the use of more modern technology, namely fMRI, which would be functional MRI or magnetic radiation imaging, so brain scans. This research has actually been able to reveal that it's the selective use of these two languages, which is usually called code switching within the field. It activates cognitive mechanisms unique from those employed for monolingual communication. So while this difference does create a slightly delayed path of development in early stages, the gap is actually bridged very quickly, usually by age 2. So during that first year of development, while they are slightly behind, by age 1 or 2, they're actually at the same point, and what we see moving forward is that it actually accelerates development in the future. And yeah, as I said before, that kind of bleeds into their grammar and language processing. There's increased linguistic competence that you can see all the way through the period of adolescence. So while the field is complex and still in need of greater exploration, these findings are critical in understanding the way that bilinguals differ in their development and acquisition of language, along with providing much needed clarity on these previous theories and kind of smoothing over and letting us all understand the differences in development for those bilingual people versus their monolingual counterparts, and how, as we previously misunderstood, the path of development is not linear, and it's nuanced and specific depending on language individually and their complexity, and also each subject. Well, that's all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Fascinating stuff. Again, anyone who has any questions here, put them in the Q&A. One that I have here is, Charlie, what was the original inspiration for diving into this topic for you?
My original question was how exactly. I mean, I guess I kind of had this misconception that over many years I had asked lots of parents who have like a spouse that speaks another language, where they speak both languages at home, like, does your child ever randomly speak a word from the other language when they're speaking like your language? And they always say no. So the project's original intent was to kind of dive deeper into that and find out if it does ever happen or why it doesn't happen. And the answer was kind of a little bit unfortunate. It wasn't that interesting, just innate ability. I guess it just doesn't happen. But I guess diving into the developmental curves and the other nuances was definitely a lot more interesting. So there you go.
Fascinating. All right. Anyone have any other questions here? I got one more because it does personally resonate, because my daughter, my wife speaks Japanese, and so my daughter, who's 5, speaks Japanese to my wife and English to me, and doesn't even like mixing them. And if I try to say a few words of Japanese, she'll be like, "No, Daddy."
Mm-hmm.
She just doesn't. And so she those are her cues, and she just switches back, and the code switching is seamless. She just kind of goes back and forth, and sometimes it even depends on the topic. If she's talking about her American school, she'll be speaking in English. If she's talking about her Japanese language school where she is today, then she'll be talking in Japanese. It's interesting.
Yeah, the one other detail I would add about that is that since Japanese and English are phonologically so different, like the most important differentiating factor is rhythm. And obviously, Japanese is very, very different rhythm that you would hear in English. The only study where we did encounter like a situation like yours, where you have parents speaking 2 languages, or Spanish and Catalan, because they really are so similar, both vocabularily and like in their rhythm. So the ability to actually figure out which is which as an infant takes a lot longer to develop. So at that early stage, they do sometimes switch without even realizing, but it does seem to kind of work itself out no matter what.
All right, fascinating stuff. All right, thank you so much. Question, Christopher.
Yeah, I actually had a question for the previous, Charlie. Does any of your studies involve analyzing this language development as people growing up with more than 2 languages? So for example, my mother grew up speaking 3, Cantonese, English, and Indonesian. And she kind of switches in between all 3 and sometimes speaks in all 3 at the same time when she's talking to other family members. Have you seen anything similar to that in your findings?
So yes, however, it was more minimal since a lot of the research done on this, they kind of, not that there aren't multilingual subjects, being like 3, 4, 5, however many. But in order to really solidify their findings and make them presentable in a way that's going to prove the developmental claims, which was mostly the focus, they do try to find people that are at least only speaking 2 at home. However, what you're saying about later on in life, kind of voluntarily code switching, I did have 2 or 3 studies about that, saying that you do develop, like I had just said to Chris, the ability to differentiate them, but the usage of multiple languages at once, actually, basically what they find is that people who are able to do that develop increased linguistic competency because they have so many syntactical quirks to remember and the vocabulary from different languages. Like, for example, in Japanese, you don't really have a word for toes, and it's similar in Spanish or depending on your dialect. And you would have that in another language. So people associate different words with different things. And I guess having the perspective from the other language is conducive to greater competency in every language individually.
All right, cool. Thank you.
All right, Muskan, you got a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, did your study ever come across anything about cultural IQ?
It did not.
Okay.
Right. Cool. Fascinating stuff again. Thanks, Charlie, for the summary. Let's move on to Christopher Mach. The next 5 minutes are yours.
All right, can we see everything all good?
Yes.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's nice to meet you. My name is Christopher Mach, and I am doing a short microstudy on the existence and discussion of the self-serving bias in the context of competitive online gaming communities. So what I did, I was using Reddit as a platform. I performed a comment dump onto Google Sheets to briefly analyze discussions happening in these various online communities. And the purpose of this microstudy is to segue into a more complex study of correlation between the self-serving bias and online toxicity. On top of this discourse analysis, I have a little data from that study that I'm excited to share with everyone today as well. So let's recap the definition of self-serving bias. It's a tendency to attribute good events to oneself and negative events to external factors. There's a nicer definition on screen from a psych textbook I had. The self-serving bias manifests itself in unique ways given a competitive online gaming community as a context. In the examples I have seen, the self-serving bias comes in one of 3 forms. It's either diversion and responsibility to other players, to character design in the game, or game design itself. In today's presentation, I'll be showcasing an example of diversion to the game design. So in this example, you see members from 2 communities of Riot Games IPs, Valorant and League of Legends, discuss their experience with an alleged game mechanic called Loser's Queue. So here are all these players saying, Loser's Queue is ruining my competitive online gaming experience. And what exactly is this Loser's Queue? It's a supposed hidden lobby in the Valorant and League's game that places an individual into a lobby with bad players that is guaranteed to result in a loss, no matter what. The idea is that no matter what the player does, the player will always lose a game while in a loser's queue match. And here are a couple of comments from that community responding to this post, saying things like, oh yeah, I just called this a loser's queue mechanic, a force 50% system. Loser's queue definitely exists because why wouldn't a huge company like Riot want to manipulate people into buying more skins, which is an in-game cosmetic thing. There is definitely a loser's queue because yada yada, I keep losing. And how could anyone believe loser's queue isn't real when Riot literally filed a patent on it in 2013? But by the way, that patent isn't for loser's queue, it's for a matchmaking system that analyzes a player's personality typing and matches them against similar personality types, not necessarily a malicious hidden queue. Now, in all of these comments, we see players of each respective community try to justify their losses as problems with the game design or with factors out of their control. And they're so invested in this justification that it's kind of some kind of confirmation bias loop, and they'll try to find any way possible to affirm it. So one guy tries to use statistics, force 50% system, says variance is a lie. I mean, that's just not how stats works. One guy tries to analyze supposed intentions behind the system like this, and like even this is a bit of a leap. This third guy is just losing and doesn't want to accept that him losing is probably not the game design, and it's a very similar problem with the fourth person. And actually, I want to take a brief detour from our main topic and talk about something that I've noticed both personally and from anecdotes of other players, which is this problem of toxicity in these online game communities, which I would describe as the tendency to exhibit a high ego, aggressiveness, and general lack of sportsmanship/respect that is detrimental to the enjoyment of the game. And many people who have told me, and many friends have told me, that they find toxicity problematic in a lot of these game communities. And some people are better than dealing with toxic individuals than others, but they're all in consensus that yes, it's a problem. And I have friends personally tell me that, like, oh, I would get into so-and-so game community, or I would try to get into these communities, but their reputation to have a very toxic kind of community is scary to me, and I don't want to engage with it. And so coming back onto topic, a question I developed was what, if any, correlation existed between the self-serving bias phenomenon and online toxicity in these game communities. And in a short survey I conducted amongst my friend group using League of Legends as a context, I have found that for about every one increase in the rated self-serving bias score, their predicted toxicity would go up by 0.588 with a pretty strong R value of 0.7113. So it's not a it's pretty strong correlation. I should mention though that this is a very, very small sample size with a convenient sample and adjusting for one outlier. So, I mean, you could call it cherry picked if you want. It's not that far beyond that realm. Currently though, these surveys have been approved by an ethics board and have been released into the world of Reddit to gather more data. And I'm very excited to analyze that and have some more interesting stuff to talk about that later down the road. That's all for me today. Thank you for listening.
All right, Christopher, thank you very much for that overview. And just if you could reword the conclusion, just for the layperson. So there is a positive correlation between self-serve bias and toxicity,
Yes.
which is the existence of both. That's what you're saying.
I would say I wouldn't say like the existence of both, more so that the degree of your tendency to exhibit some kind of self-serving bias trends along with your degree to be a more toxic individual, at least behaviorally, in these communities. So like the self-serving bias is a established phenomenon, and I mean, I guess you can't really establish toxicity with just this, but I mean, I could go into a discourse analysis of that as well.
Got it. Okay. It sounds like you have another round of research coming up with a larger sample size, so that will be pretty interesting. Cool. Anybody have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand or type the questions into the Q&A. All right. Let's all right, two more presenters. Let's go to Caden Lee. Caden, are you ready?
Yep.
All right, take it away.
Cool. Can you guys do this?
Yes.
All right. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Caden Lee, and today I would like to talk to you about how we learn languages best. I'm sure many of you know the experience of being in the language classroom, and I'm curious, how many of you felt as if you were learning something during the school year, but looked back maybe a year or so later and realized how much you actually forgot? If I'm guessing correctly, I would be willing to say that a lot of you have had this experience. A lot of the current existing curricula surrounding language learning include grammar lessons, vocabulary lists, and speaking exercises at their core. However, if you're really going to try and pick up a second language, activities such as the ones mentioned previously are by no means the most effective way to build proficiency.
So in my paper, a literature review, I explored in depth Stephen Krashen's input hypothesis, a 5-faceted model explaining how the human brain acquires languages best. And I additionally analyzed the efficacy of different language learning approaches based on this model, and lastly, considered different practical applications for this model in the classroom. So in the first and most, probably arguably most important facet of the input hypothesis, Krashen states that comprehensible linguistic input is the crux of language acquisition. So to put this kind of in more easier terms, if our current level in a language were to be I, comprehensible input would be I+1, with this one representing an unknown grammar structure or word. In other words, we acquire another language best when we're presented with speech or text that's slightly above our slightly above our level in that language and with adequate context. So using an example, let's take the Japanese phrase "hamburger o taberu." And even though you probably might not know what taberu means, you probably might know, based on context, what hamburger means. And you might even guess that this phrase means to eat a hamburger based on the context given. So this is how the brain naturally acquires language best and is the most effective method to develop true proficiency, building a true feel for the language. And although a formal education can help, acquiring a language through context and comprehensible input is ultimately the most effective way to learn. So many different approaches have been made based on Krashen's model, but most of them have one thing in common, and that is an emphasis on immersion. So when a learner is immersed in an environment full of comprehensible input, they acquire quickly and can even become fluent in a language in a short time. An example of this occurrence would be a native English speaker moving to Mexico and learning Spanish in as little as 6 months. However, going back to the language classroom, especially the ones in America, students are often bombarded with endless exercises that will not increase their intrinsic proficiency or feel for a language, and will lead them to memorize endless grammar structures and vocabulary that they won't know how to manipulate outside the classroom. However, if we were to implement more strategies in the classroom that prioritize language acquisition and immersion over standard didactic learning, strategies including activities such as free reading or watching TV shows, there would be numerous benefits. Vocabulary and grammar wouldn't be forced into a student's brain, but rather naturally acquired. Overall proficiency would go up, and rather than speaking like 5-year-olds by the time they leave high school, students would be able to have meaningful conversations with others and ingest complex material with the language they have learned and acquired in high school. My next steps are publishing my literature review in a high school journal and continuing research on the input hypothesis and different other language learning hypotheses, as well as their uses in the classroom. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
All right. Thank you, Caden. Very good overview of the hard work you've done over the last couple months. What was your original inspiration for this topic?
So yeah, I have experience learning Japanese to a decent level of proficiency through immersion learning. And that's just a fancy term for just watching a lot of anime or just Japanese TV shows and programs, and just learning through context and just kind of subconsciously picking up the language. And I think that was my main primary motivation in researching this more, because it works really well for me, and I wanted to see if this could be also used in the classroom as well.
All right. Any questions from the audience here, including our speakers? Feel free to either raise your hand or type the question in the Q&A. Ophelia, you have a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering, throughout your research, have you seen any correlation between learning languages and people with learning disabilities?
I have not. So that was one thing that I didn't necessarily explore, but anecdotally, I can say that with ADHD, this method has been proven kind of effective, even with people with learning disabilities such as ADHD.
All right. Did I miss another hand that was raised? Muskan, did you have?
No,
a
I was
question?
about to ask a similar question.
Oh, okay.
Can I ask a question? So when you're saying it's dependent on the amount of input, and I heard you said about it being slightly above your level. You said that watching anime helps you like improve your Japanese. Did your research ever explore the difference between just having input, like for example, watching anime or any other sort of TV movie spoken in Japanese, maybe with subtitles, maybe not, versus actually conversationally, or like if you went to Japan, being immersed in that way where you also have to produce?
So number one, in that context with Japan, I think if you were to go to the language, if you were to go to the country which speaks the language that you're trying to learn, obviously you would be bombarded with a ton of input, whether it's comprehensible or not. And it's funny because there was also another hypothesis that kind of, it didn't necessarily work together with the input hypothesis, but it was more of a competitor hypothesis with how the brain acquires language. And I explored that more in my paper, but it hypothesized that we learn when we're trying to actively speak, and when we're actively trying to kind of correct our input or our output. And basically the entire thing was speaking is what actually drives language learning. So I did encounter that in my research, but I didn't explore it too much. And that's actually one of the things I'd like to explore more in the future.
Cool.
All right. Muskan, final question?
Yes. So other than your own experience, have you seen this? Have you like seen in any of your research a school actually try this?
Yes, actually, there have been some, namely Latin classrooms, actually putting into practice these principles provided by the input hypothesis, and that is basically just a lot of emphasis on free reading and just watching TV shows, piquing your interest using resources that are available in that language. And actually, for the most part, the current research body on that has proven that utilizing these principles of input in the classroom actually lead to higher levels of proficiency and longer term proficiency as well.
Do you know how long it took for these students to get fluent in that language?
That was something that wasn't necessarily explored, but I have seen, and this is not, formally explored in any of the papers that I've read, but I've seen on YouTube and in certain language learning communities that a lot of these people utilizing methods of immersion have gained, complete fluency in a language using immersion methods from anywhere spanning to like 1 year to maybe like even 3 years, which is actually a significant improvement as opposed to if you were just to endlessly learn different grammar structures and everything in the classroom.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Caden. Very good. All right. Ophelia, you'll be up next. And there is a 5-minute buffer between these sessions. So so Ophelia, you'll get your full 5 minutes plus another couple of minutes. And we're going to go into that break period, but that's okay because there's a buffer. So if you're ready to go, then the floor is yours.
Can you see it?
I can hear you and I can see you, but not the screen share.
Oh.
There we go.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Sorry, I was late. I was having technical difficulties.
No problem.
Okay. Hi, I'm Ophelia Burden. Thank you for joining me. My hypothesis is how Anabaena can improve plant growth on Mars by acting as a biofertilizer. Whoops, sorry. Mars is a barren plant that lives within the habitable zone. Mars has been of large interest to astrobiologists and future colonization because of past oceans and lakes. The problem on Mars is that resources can be sent only every 26 months, ideal alignment between Earth and Mars. The solution for this is for the colonists to become more self-sufficient by using hydroponics and cyanobacteria to make the Martian soil able to sustain plant growth. The cyanobacteria that I'll be using is Anabaena. Anabaena is a photosynthetic microorganism that uses nitrogen fixating, meaning that it takes nitrogen from the atmosphere and converts it into substances that plants can take in. In my project, I'll be using 4 deep water culture hydroponic systems. The first system will have just cyanobacteria. The second will have cyanobacteria and Miracle-Gro. The third will have just Miracle-Gro, and the fourth will be the control. Each system will have a water nutrient solution, and the plant growth will be measured to determine the effectiveness of the cultures. Conclusion help us colonize Mars in a more effective way. This can also help us understand the sustainability of using hydroponics and cyanobacteria, as well as helping us understand how Anabaena and cyanobacteria can be used as fertilizer, not only on Earth, but also on Mars. Thank you so much for listening to my project. Is there any questions?
All right, thanks, Ophelia.
Thank you.
All right. Aarav, go for it.
Hey, Ophelia. I think your project sounds really interesting.
Thank you.
In AP Bio last year, we had to try growing plants in different UV lights, and mine bombed, but you can grow them. That's cool. I was wondering though, since Mars has a different sort of climate than Earth and like moisture content and all, would your experiment account for that, and like in what ways?
Well, in my experiment, I'm going to be doing it in the hydroponic system, which on Mars, the colonists would already have a base set up. So the hydroponic system will be in a very controlled environment, not exactly in the like just the Mars like of the atmosphere, but it'll be in a more controlled environment so that it won't be like affected as much by the Martian like atmosphere.
All right, I understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Ophelia, what was your initial inspiration for this topic?
Last year I did a project on how tardigrades can survive on Jupiter's moon Europa, and I wanted to explore more about other planets such as Mars because it's more in the habitable zone and more closer to what Earth is like besides like planets and moons that are outside of the habitable zone. So I wanted to explore and see like how humans could maybe survive on Mars since Earth is being affected a lot by climate change and other external factors.
Got it. All right. Any other questions for Ophelia? Or for any of the other panelists as we wrap up here? All right. Fantastic job from everyone. Really interesting, fascinating stuff. Well presented. Thank you so much. And yeah, this concludes this session. There's a couple more sessions, so feel free to join and see some of your other peers present. But otherwise, we'll go back into the lobby area. Thank you so much.